It was only last week we were talking about the knife statistics and more young people particularly being stabbed in this country than ever before. And now there's another case up in Warrington, not a million miles away from you.
Okay, before we finish the rest of this clip, I need you all to understand that the literal child that was brutally murdered in this story is a trans girl who was murdered by 2 of her classmates.
Emma Fortune. Apparently, I think is the name of the... Brianna Gay is the girl's name, stabbed to death in a village park. I mean, there was an incident, not a particularly bad incident, not far from where my kids live, which is a very leafy sort of village in Sussex. I mean, this is going on all over the place now.
It is because, unfortunately, crime, as you and I would recognise it, is not a priority of the police.
Yeah.
For instance, a recent Home Office report showed that only 3.7% of burglaries, 4.2% of thefts, and 6.6% of robberies resulted in a charge. Now, the police seem to take the view that, like death and taxes, we are now expected to accept low-level crime as just an inevitable fact of life. The police, unfortunately, are far too busy conducting their ideological policing to crack on with the rough and dirty business of dealing with crime. And that, unfortunately, is a result of us having a woke police force and having a bunch of police officers who are, they're not diversity officers, Mike, they are political commissars. And their main focus is not protecting you and I from villains and low-level theft and mid-level crime. They're interested in pronouns, they're interested in promoting Black Lives Matter, and they're interested in cracking down on any form of dissent.
So this clip is deeply, deeply shameful, and it speaks to just like the unbelievable amount of hate that must exist in the hearts of these transphobic people. Because fundamentally, how do you take a story about a young trans girl being murdered by her classmates and then turn it into some story about how you think the police are too woke, especially considering the fact that so far everybody is sort of rushing to say, oh, there's no evidence that this is a hate crime. There's not really anything to say this is a hate crime yet. And yet everything around the situation very much makes it seem very clearly to be a hate crime, which makes it seem like the police are not interested in enforcing some sort of woke agenda, but in fact are in many ways doing quite the opposite and trying to downplay the transness of the victim, because fundamentally in the UK as well as in the United States, people don't want to accept the real material reality of how transphobia affects trans people. They don't want to talk about the fact that both suicide rates and murder rates against trans people are incredibly high, and it is specifically because we have so normalized this extremely vitriolic transphobia. And when trans people are the victims of a crime, very often their trans identity is completely erased. And then these people have the audacity to come in and say that the police are being too woke. And like, what's funny is their criticism of police departments is like a very real critique in the sense of like, yeah, police departments don't actually really solve crime. That's like a whole problem that exists with the entire policing system, both in the United States and the UK. Police are not really there to actually solve crime or keep people safe. They're mostly there just to protect the social order, which really just means like our capitalist systems of government and fundamentally oppressing marginalized people and upholding the power and privilege of privileged people. But that's not what these people are complaining about. They're not complaining about police officers not solving crime because they actually care about crime being solved, because they know that the people that are most likely to be the victims of crimes are also the same people that are most likely to be victimized by the police as well. And that is something that holds true both in the UK and the United States. No, they have taken a story about the murder of a transgender child and twisted it into some sort of sick story about how they think the police are being too woke, that we're respecting the existence of trans people too much somehow. This is absolutely sickening. And this is something that fundamentally is the fault of our deeply transphobic society, of all of the right-wing influencers that try to spread this hatred and instigate all of this violence against trans people. All of their fear-mongering, all their dehumanizing language, all culminates into moments like this, where you have a literal child that is murdered by her classmates. People aren't magically born transphobes. They aren't magically born like these violent transphobic people that just want to commit murders for no reason. This is a part of a culture that actively cultivates this, because quite literally just the simple idea of trans people existing is too much to bear for these transphobic weirdos. So much so that they literally raise their children to be violent in such a way that they would victimize their own classmates. All trans people are asking for right now is really just two basic things. One, bodily autonomy, and the idea that children should be able to go through whichever puberty they're the most comfortable with at the normal puberty age. That's it. It's that simple. And the other is to just be allowed to live in peace and to be left alone. These are things that are not that difficult. These are things that are not that complicated. If you want to say you have concerns about medical issues or this, that, or the other thing, I need you to sit down and recognize the fact that these are conversations that are going to happen between patients and doctors. And there's nothing that you know more about somebody's medical situation that's going to be more helpful or better than their doctors, and you need to respect that privacy. Because do you really want everybody else to be up in your medical business? I didn't think so. So yes, let trans kids be themselves and be comfortable, and raise your children to be accepting and to let people to live in peace. And not only that, when things like this happen, you need to actively stand up and speak out against it. Because the transphobic people right now think that they're winning. They think that they're the popular ones because there are so many cisgender allies that choose to stay silent and choose to maintain decorum and politeness over actually protecting and respecting the existence of trans people around them.